One explosion, one bridge, and one furious reaction from Vladimir Putin that shook global politics. The Crimea Bridge blast was not just an attack on infrastructure, it was a direct challenge to Russian power. Why did Putin react with such anger? And why did the world suddenly fear what might come next? Stay with us, because what happened after the explosion changed the direction of the entire conflict. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are breaking down one of the most shocking moments of the Ukraine-Russia war, the explosion on the Crimea Bridge and Vladimir Putin's furious reaction that followed. The Crimea Bridge is not just a road or railway connection, it is a powerful symbol of Russia's control over Crimea. When news of the explosion broke, it instantly grabbed global attention and raised serious questions about security, escalation, and retaliation. For Moscow, this bridge represents political pride, military logistics, and personal legacy for Putin himself. That is why this incident triggered an unusually strong response from the Kremlin. In this video, we will carefully analyze what really happened, why the bridge matters so much, and how Putin's reaction sent shockwaves across the world. We will also explore how this event affected military planning, international diplomacy, and the psychological dimension of the conflict. Rather than focusing on rumors or emotional narratives, this analysis sticks to verified developments and strategic implications. Understanding this moment is critical because it reveals how fragile the situation remains and how quickly events can spiral. By the end of this video, you will clearly understand why this single explosion terrified global leaders and why Putin's reaction was far more than just anger. It was a signal, a warning, and possibly a turning point in the war itself. To understand why the Crimea Bridge explosion mattered so deeply, we must first understand the bridge's strategic and symbolic importance. The bridge connects mainland Russia directly to Crimea, making it a lifeline for military supplies, civilian transport, and economic activity. Since its construction, the bridge has been promoted by the Kremlin as proof that Crimea is permanently integrated into Russia. Vladimir Putin personally inaugurated the bridge, turning it into a symbol of national pride and political achievement. Any damage to it, therefore, strikes far beyond physical infrastructure. Militarily, the bridge supports troop movement, fuel deliveries, and equipment transfers. Politically, it represents Russia's claim over Crimea to both domestic and international audiences. When the explosion occurred, it exposed vulnerabilities that Russia had repeatedly denied. The timing was also critical, as the war had already placed enormous pressure on Russian forces. Analysts immediately recognized that this was not just an attack on a bridge, but a psychological blow aimed at Moscow's confidence. For supporters of Ukraine, it demonstrated reach and capability. For Russia, it raised fears of further strikes on critical assets. This context explains why the Kremlin reacted so forcefully. The bridge was never just concrete and steel. It was power, control, and identity. Damaging it challenged all three at once. When reports of the explosion emerged, the Kremlin's response was swift and intense. Vladimir Putin reportedly held emergency meetings with security officials, military commanders, and intelligence agencies. Russian state media quickly shifted tone, emphasizing retaliation and responsibility rather than damage control. Putin publicly described the explosion as a terrorist act, language that immediately escalated the narrative. This wording was not accidental. Labeling the incident in such terms justified stronger military responses and harsher security measures. Observers noted that Putin's body language and speech reflected visible anger, something rarely displayed so openly. His reaction signaled that this event crossed a red line. Shortly after, Russia launched intensified strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure, widely seen as a direct response. The message was clear: attacks on symbols of Russian control would be met with overwhelming force. International analysts interpreted this as both punishment and deterrence. Domestically, the reaction aimed to reassure Russian citizens that the state remained strong and in control. Internationally, it served as a warning to Ukraine and its allies. Putin's anger was not just emotional, it was strategic communication. By reacting so aggressively, the Kremlin sought to restore credibility and project strength after a deeply embarrassing breach. This response amplified global concern about escalation and potential widening of the conflict. The world reacted with a mix of shock, concern, and careful calculation. Western governments closely monitored Putin's statements, understanding that his reaction could signal a dangerous escalation. NATO officials emphasized restraint while quietly increasing intelligence assessments. Markets responded nervously, with energy prices fluctuating amid fears of wider instability. Media coverage framed the explosion as a potential turning point, focusing heavily on Putin's furious response rather than the physical damage alone. For many global leaders, the key concern was not what had already happened, but what might happen next. Would Russia expand its military campaign or target new regions? Would unconventional weapons be considered? These questions dominated diplomatic discussions. Meanwhile, Ukraine's allies reaffirmed support while avoiding language that could provoke further escalation. The incident highlighted how interconnected global security has become. A single explosion on a bridge triggered reactions across continents. Analysts pointed out that Putin's response appeared designed to instill fear and uncertainty, reminding the world of Russia's capacity for retaliation. This psychological dimension is why the reaction itself became more frightening than the blast. It demonstrated how quickly tensions could rise and how fragile existing red lines were. The world was not just watching events unfold. It was bracing for consequences. From a military perspective, the explosion forced Russia to reassess its logistics and defensive posture. The bridge's partial disruption complicated supply routes, even if temporarily. Russian forces had to reroute shipments, increasing strain on already stretched networks. This logistical impact explains part of Putin's anger. Modern warfare depends heavily on secure infrastructure, and the attack revealed weaknesses. Military analysts noted that protecting long, exposed structures like the Crimea Bridge is extremely challenging. Even advanced defenses cannot guarantee complete security. This realization likely unsettled Russian planners. In response, Russia increased air defenses and patrols around critical sites. The incident also prompted a broader review of internal security and intelligence failures. Questions emerged about how the attack was planned and executed. These concerns went beyond the battlefield. They touched the core of Russia's security apparatus. For Putin, whose leadership emphasizes strength and control, such vulnerabilities are unacceptable. The furious reaction can therefore be seen as an attempt to reassert authority within the system. By demanding accountability and ordering visible retaliation, he reinforced discipline. Militarily, the explosion did not decide the war, but it shifted calculations. It showed that no target was entirely safe. That message resonated far beyond Crimea. Politically, the explosion and Putin's reaction had significant domestic implications. Russian leadership relies heavily on narratives of stability and security. An attack on such a prominent symbol challenged that narrative. State media moved quickly to control the story, emphasizing resilience and retaliation rather than vulnerability. Putin's anger served a purpose here. It redirected public focus from the breach itself to the promise of response. By portraying the incident as an external attack requiring unity, the Kremlin reinforced internal cohesion. This strategy has been used repeatedly during moments of crisis. However, independent observers noted growing unease among some segments of the population. Questions about security failures and prolonged conflict quietly circulated. Internationally, Putin's reaction hardened positions. Diplomatic efforts became more difficult as rhetoric intensified. The explosion reduced space for compromise, at least in the short term. Leaders on all sides faced pressure to appear strong. This dynamic increases risk, as miscalculations become more likely when emotions run high. The political impact, therefore, extended beyond Russia. It influenced how allies, adversaries, and neutral states interpreted the conflict's trajectory. Putin's furious response signaled that symbolic attacks would be treated as existential threats. That framing carries serious consequences for future negotiations and stability. Another critical aspect is the psychological warfare element. The explosion achieved disproportionate impact precisely because of the reaction it provoked. Psychological operations aim to undermine confidence, create doubt, and force overreaction. In this case, the furious response amplified fear. Even without massive physical destruction, the event dominated headlines. Putin's visible anger reinforced the perception that something deeply sensitive had been struck. This plays into the logic of modern conflict, where perception often matters as much as battlefield outcomes. By reacting strongly, Russia sought to deter future attacks. At the same time, it inadvertently highlighted how much symbolic targets matter. For global audiences, the incident demonstrated that psychological pressure can influence strategic behavior. This lesson is being studied closely by military planners worldwide. The fear was not only about immediate retaliation, it was about unpredictability. When leaders appear angry, the risk of sudden escalation feels higher. That uncertainty is destabilizing. It affects diplomatic channels, economic decisions, and public sentiment. The explosion, combined with Putin's reaction, thus became a case study in how emotions and symbolism interact in geopolitics. Understanding this helps explain why the world felt genuinely unsettled. Looking ahead, the long-term consequences of this incident remain significant. Infrastructure protection has become an even higher priority for Russia. Expect increased security measures, surveillance, and military presence around key assets. For Ukraine and its allies, the event demonstrated the strategic value of targeting symbols rather than territory alone. Diplomatically, the explosion hardened narratives on both sides, making de-escalation more complex. Putin's reaction set a precedent for how similar incidents might be handled in the future. Any attack on symbolic infrastructure is now likely to trigger an aggressive response. This increases the stakes of future operations. Global actors must therefore navigate a more volatile environment. The incident also influenced public perception of the war. It reminded audiences that despite periods of relative stagnation, sudden shocks remain possible. The bridge explosion and the furious reaction that followed underscored how quickly the conflict can intensify. For policymakers, this serves as a warning about complacency. For citizens, it highlights the ongoing risks of escalation. The long-term impact will depend on whether such events become isolated incidents or part of a broader pattern. Either way, this moment will be remembered as a signal that the conflict had entered a more unpredictable phase. In summary, the Crimea Bridge explosion was far more than a tactical event. Its true power lay in the reaction it provoked. Putin's furious response revealed how deeply symbolic infrastructure matters in modern conflicts. It showed that control is not only about territory, but about narratives, confidence, and perception. The global fear that followed was rooted in uncertainty. When leaders react with visible anger, the risk of escalation feels immediate. This is why the world watched so closely. The incident highlighted vulnerabilities, shifted calculations, and hardened positions. It reminded everyone that the war remains highly volatile. For analysts, it provided valuable insight into Russian decision-making under pressure. For the public, it underscored how quickly events can escalate. Understanding this episode helps explain current dynamics and future risks. It is not just about a bridge. It is about power, pride, and the dangerous interplay between symbolism and force. That is why this moment continues to resonate. It was a warning that the conflict is far from predictable, and that single events can still have outsized impact. As we conclude, it is clear that the Crimea Bridge explosion and Putin's furious reaction marked a defining moment in the conflict. It exposed vulnerabilities, intensified rhetoric, and heightened global anxiety. More importantly, it demonstrated how symbolism can drive strategic behavior. The bridge was not merely damaged. A narrative was challenged. Putin's response sought to restore deterrence and project strength. But it also revealed how sensitive certain targets remain. For the world, the lesson is sobering. Even limited actions can trigger wide-ranging consequences. This incident serves as a reminder that the conflict's trajectory can change suddenly, driven by emotion as much as strategy. Staying informed and analytical is therefore essential. Understanding reactions, not just actions, helps us anticipate risks. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to support the channel. Your engagement helps us continue delivering clear, balanced analysis on complex global issues. The situation remains fluid, and future developments will demand careful attention. We will continue to track these events and explain what they mean, without hype and without bias. Thank you for watching. And if you want more deep geopolitical analysis like this, now is the time to act. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this analysis so others can understand what is really happening.